Thank you. So yeah, I'm gonna try maybe to squeeze a bit my presentation. We didn't mention maybe, but we will share all the slides with the people in the room here and with those who register. We are actually planning to make them open as possible, as close as necessary. So yeah, thank you, Vittorio, for the introduction. Briefly, just to tell you what I'm actually doing, because staff scientist or data agent is a bit obscure title. So in practice, I'm kind of a research support person with daily issues that our researchers might have with computational workflows, for example, with sensitive data minimization, so anything from full anonymization to defacing or pseudonymization, and also kind of hands-on help in writing the ethical application or legal documents like privacy notices, DPIA, and stuff like that. So my background is I'm an engineer, so more kind of in computational stuff, but of course we work with a team of lawyers and people from the ethics committee and people from kind of library services, research services with background in data management and stuff like that. And it was interesting that you asked about teaching and training, so I shared there the link in the slides. You will have it. We are very active in training on research data management and personal data and these type of things. So our trainings are also on YouTube. They can be rewatched in the future. And in general, we are planning them every autumn and every spring. So there's always a chance to join. They're open for everyone. And in my free time, meaning I'm supposed to do like 1 day a week, I'm actually supposed to do some research. So I still do some neuroimaging and medical imaging. All right, but now to the talk. Maybe the motivation that, I was thinking of something interactive, but maybe we don't need to, or you can answer to this question in your head. Why do we need to share our data? Sometimes, or well, I'm not saying that it's not needed always to share our data, but one might assume that if everything is so clear on how I collected the data and how I analyzed the data and the methods and the code and everything was open, maybe I don't need to share my data. Maybe you can collect your own data. And of course, the main core principle is that we should always remember that the data secrecy is against transparency. And transparency is at the core of research integrity. So if one picks the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, there are 4 main kind of topics, 4 main principal lines of the research integrity. And the second one, honesty, directly concern transparency. And the first one, on reliability, in a way touches transparency with the reproducibility, meaning that the research should be reliable. And in some cases, you need access to the original data and to the original codes to rerun and to reobtain the same results. So this reason is enough to answer the question why we should share our data and why it's important to share data. So if we think of a hypothetical research process, where we would have an experiment where, we show some stimuli, let's say, or we have some protocol, that would be the experiment, where we collect data and we get then new data, in this case, personal data, and then we do some processing of the data with some computational tools. Sometimes we might reuse existing data from the literature, from other sources. Then we generate these derivatives. So like, if I know that some here in the audience are people with a background in neuroimaging, so this would be like statistical maps or averages across subjects. And then of course we publish articles and posters and figures, sometimes methods, sometimes or very rarely data. So rather than talking about brain imaging, I like to always talk about cases with using fingerprints, because if something is true for a paper, for a study that uses fingerprints, then it's the same for neuroimaging. So for example, in the picture that I linked there, in the study that I linked there, they collected fingerprints to train some artificial intelligence to decode gender. So you see, you have all the ingredients. There's a bit of privacy, personal data protection issues, and of course there might be also a bit of ethical issues on the sensitivity of sexuality and gender. So if you this paper actually was collected in India. So this data was actually data set collected in India, and if you would open the paper yourself, you will be able to do this in the slides. You actually notice that there's no mention of ethics or data protection. All right, so if we start giving some colors of the different boxes, now the colors that I give here are like based on my experience as a reviewer of neuroimaging and experimental psychology articles. Of course, the article is something green, that people share as often as possible, even though it might be not open access, but you can still find it in a way or another. And sometimes also people share their posters and their figures, so these are colored in green. The protocol for collecting the data, so the experiment or the methods to process the data, are also shared sometimes, not as often. So as a reviewer, sometimes I might ask, could you share the code? I'm never really forcing anyone. I'm not going to say your paper is not going to be accepted if you don't share the code, but I give a motivation that even though it might be a trivial code, even though it might be nothing to still it's better. Another issue that I notice is the sharing of the derivatives, which were
I think there's a problem with the connection.
Sharing derivatives that were already touched.
Enrico,
I switched off my camera.
Okay.
Is it better now? I switched off my camera, so maybe. Hello.
Yeah, let's see what happens. I mean, I think it's already improving. So.
Okay. So I now ask a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I will talk maybe slowly, so that the missing bits will survive the internet tunnels. So I was just saying that something that I noticed about the derivatives is that very rarely papers are sharing actually these statistical maps, which are really, really important. People should open them. And as Dorian already mentioned, there are repositories where you can share this type of maps. However, when it comes to the actual data, the colors of these bits strongly depend on the country where the research is happening. So then, if we are in a country and if you work in a country where the GDPR should be followed, then there is no way that, that you can, or it becomes very, very difficult to open the raw data or, share anything that would basically contain personal data, as will be already covered here. So in general, the problem that we are trying to show here is that researchers from GDPR countries can be transparent only with a certain selected audiences, because then, yes, I can give you all the data, the personal data that I collected because you are in another country where the GDPR works, or because you can prove that you can ensure the same level of data protection than the GDPR. But then also that researchers from GDPR countries might be in disadvantage because, for example, because of not the possibility of sharing as open as possible, they might get less citations and they might not even see the point of, going through the extra effort of making the data available if in practice, it's too complicated. And then there are also the ethical issues. So that, for example, sensitive data sets are then going to be collected in countries where this law do not apply. I gave you an example with a fingerprint data set in India. The other example linked here, it's 600 subjects and their fingerprints from Africa. So, is this the solution to the data protection issue, that we just go to other countries or we are, where the GDPR is not working, to collect these huge data sets where there's no ethical review, there's no data protection, and but still this, for example, this collection of 600 African individuals, it's an open data set, fully open on Kaggle, which is a big platform for machine learning in the United States. So, of course, and final, the last point is also the sustainability of the research, because if it becomes so difficult to reuse the data, then in the end we will not reuse the data, and we will always need to collect new data sets to answer maybe similar questions. So this was already covered by Giorgia in the first talk, that the core legal, ethical and legal issue relates to the so-called broad consent. How can we ask for consent to an individual taking part to a study so that other researchers, and we do not yet know who these other people are, and we do not yet know what they're going to do, how can we ask for a consent for the reuse of this personal data? So in practice, the broad consent, we are waiting again, as George already mentioned, that the European Data Protection Board will issue a further clarification, but as things are right now, the GDPR cannot be interpreted to allow for a controller basically for asking for this broad consent. I don't need to cover this again because it was covered very well in the beginning. But now let's think in practice, what can we do now while we wait for the European Data Protection Board to issue new guidelines for processing personal data for scientific research purposes? And so this also, I'm repeating a bit what Dorian mentioned, we need to make sure that the data is findable, that it is somewhere and it is available on request. So it's not 100% open, it's not fully open that you click and download, but there is a way to get that data. And of course, we need to make sure that we have a process so that other researchers can request access to the data. And this doesn't mean emailing the first author of the paper, do you please have a copy of the data? The process, in my opinion, should be separated from the actual authors. The data, in many of the cases, is owned by the organization. So it's the organization that should have a process. It's the organization that should receive the request of data access, and the organization should kind of decide in the process that I will outline soon, should these 3 people who are requesting get access to the data. And then, of course, we need to prepare the data, for example, with the bits format for the neuroimaging case. Sometimes we need to have an agreement with the other party, data transfer agreement, data processing agreement, or data use agreement. There's different types of agreements that we can make sure that that the party receiving the data is actually fine. And in the end, maybe the easiest part is to have an IT system for securely sharing the data. But still, in the picture here, ethics is not present. How do we test that the new question for the same data is ethical? So I came up with this pyramid of ethically and legally sharing personal data, research with personal data. So in my opinion, the stuff that is more at the top is the one that might be the easiest already implemented. And also the stuff at the top of the pyramid is the one that happens at the end. So at the top, we have that basically you get access to the personal data. And at the bottom, it's at the very beginning that before collecting the data, you need to have ethical and legal documents ready before actually starting the data collection of and then there are different perspectives, different players that are needed in all the steps of this pyramidal process. That might be IT, technical experts or systems. There's research services people. There's the data process, what is TPO? Data protection officer and the legal teams. There's of course the ethics committees and the researchers themselves that sometimes are also needed to work on this process. But as you can see, the researchers are only, I put them only on a few steps because I don't think we need to overload the researchers even more. And I will come this to my final take-home message. So the top, granting the access to data that is personal data, because we can't make it fully publicly. Then there are multiple solutions. I don't see I don't think there are issues here. We already have many solutions. There are solutions like the UK Biobank, where you can actually request a copy of the data and download it to your university or research institute storage system and work on them. There are other, I'm familiar with what is done in the Nordic countries. So in Finland, we have, for example, the sensitive data services by CSC. In Norway, there's this sensitive data environment where in practice it's like a Zenodo, or it's like a repository where the data is not open, but the data steward can give access to a specific data set through an interface so that others can download it in some cases. In some other cases, maybe using, like in these cases that I mentioned, the Nordic countries, you can actually get access to computational resources so that you can, you don't need to get a copy of the data on your system, but you can still run all the analysis that you need to run. But of course, before getting the access, you need to have some sort of an agreement, some sort of a contract between the owner, the controller of the data, of the personal data, and the final processor, the partner, the collaborator, whoever asked for the access to this personal data. And here there are many legal documents that can be used, data transfer agreement, data processing agreement, etc. There are maybe, however, here starts to come some issues. So for example, who checks that the agreements are respected? It's in practice, there is no data police. If suddenly something goes wrong, of course, yes, we can go back to the ombudsman of the country, for example, when there are issues with personal data. But still, is it ethical to ask a subject, we're gonna give me your data, we're gonna do things with your data, hopefully nothing goes wrong, and if something goes wrong, we don't, someone will get a fine. I might be not that happy, even though in practice this is what people do when they give their personal data to Facebook or Instagram. But maybe science should keep the standards a little bit higher, and then maybe there should be a process if something goes wrong. Maybe they should also estimate that the risk of something going wrong is extremely low, that then you are really safe in giving us your brain imaging data or whatever data you give to research. Okay, then so we got the access, we got the contract between the parties, and then of course before stipulating this contract there would be a request for access. The Donders Institute in the Netherlands has a nice solution where basically through a web interface you accept a data use agreement. However, in my opinion, it's not it doesn't really follow the GDPR in a sense that this data use agreement is always accepted. Nobody really checks, okay, can you really show that, for example, you would have that there are no ethical issues with the new analysis that you're planning, that, should there be some background checks for the person who requested data to demonstrate, to show that they are truly researchers, they don't have any evil intentions. So here I put that different teams should be working together, not just the IT people for managing the process of request for access, but also the research services, the legal, the ethics. But in general, you see that I removed the researchers from the picture. I don't think researchers, if they don't own the data, if the ownership of the data is in the organization, which is a huge amount of the cases when it's publicly funded research, then the researchers could still be informed, by the way, the data that you made for that article just got a request for access, but it's the workers of the organization that you should deal with the request for access. We can't expect that a busy researcher starts answering email for request for access, and you might have seen in not just Twitter, social media, or there are papers that in general, researchers don't answer to this request for access. Sometimes I don't think there's anything malicious that they don't want to share their data. It's just that they don't have time to start answering to this extra and then start, maybe making the data available, etc., etc. Which then brings us to the data preparation. So, before the request for access come, maybe the data would be good to prepare. It would be good to tell that the researcher would tell to the research services, okay, we are done with our paper. We also prepare the data. We minimize the personal data. We have a README file. The protocol is saved. The methods we used are also shared. And here's the package. And keep it. Do something with it. And then the research services, have a good way to basically help the researchers in all these tasks, and then making sure that when a request comes, they know where the research services will know where the data are stored, that is ready to be shared, and etc. etc. Of course, there are still open issues because, at least in the organization that I've been working and that I know of, nobody really checks, like who is checking that the data is de-identified, who is checking that ethics and legal team, would they need to have a saying in this point, in this preparation of the data, because there might be legal issues or ethical issues if it's a data set that would cover minorities or some other that could lead to results that could be misinterpreted and unethical. And then there's the data collection. And this is also something that there are a potential solution, like the open brain consent that was mentioned earlier by Dorian. But in general, this would mean that when the subject comes to your experiment, it should also be asked, can we do something? Can we do something more with the data? But of course, this is difficult because the broad consent cannot be really asked. So then can we really ask for something like, I'm not sure what I will do with your data, but I will do something with your data. But maybe here a possible solution would be that the question of the consent for reuse could still be limited, that like if it's neuroimaging data, maybe the consent for reuse will be for replicating the findings that will be published and for developing new neuroimaging methods. This is still quite a small, how can I say, purpose, even though it's broad because we don't know what could be these new neuroimaging methods. And then before everything starts, getting all the ethical agreements and the legal agreements approved. It means that before the research starts, one should discuss with the ethical committees and the legal experts of the organization, can we plan for data sharing? Can we plan for data opening? Because often we can't go back, to the ethics or to the legal team if the data was already collected in the wrong way, if nothing was asked. So, in practice, one should start the planning very early, even before collecting the data. If there's a process and it's clear and all the parties agree, then, then it will be all the steps that come later in the pyramid are easier to solve. All right, so I'm kind of done with my presentation. I didn't want to keep it too long. So it's some sort of a practical view of the whole process, but having in mind all these players. But I want to add the questions that I don't have an answer. Yes, okay, cool. Let's open the data, personal data, yes. But who pays the bill? It's the usual, you can't have your cake and also eat it. So we heard it before in the previous presentation, many European organization, national organization, they all repeat to the researchers, please share your data. It's really important. Data secrecy is bad, transparency, integrity, share the data. So we have EU policies, EOSC policies, lots of words that, of course, when they issue these important messages and policies, the ministries of education of each country or the national grant agencies, of course, they say in your next grant application, you must have open data. Or, I'm for example involved in a working group for the whole country in Finland, where we're writing a policy for opening the methods, which came after a policy for opening the data. Okay, it's nice to write this policy and tell to all the universities, open your data, open your methods, but still, who's going to do the work? Then, of course, these important policies go to the universities, and the teams, usually these research services, they need to find a way, okay, we need to help motivate our researchers to open the data. And so maybe in some cases, like in some lucky cases, like we have at Alto, we have dedicated people who could actually help in this. But in other cases, maybe they don't have the budget. They just hope to point the professors or the PI to, it would be good because now in the, I don't know, let's say in the new Horizon EU grant, they really ask about opening data, please, mention that you're gonna do it so that you have higher chances. And so then the universities, they go to the PI, and the PI should now be thinking, all right, I already millions of things on my desk. Now I should also think of a plan for sharing the data and solve all the GDPR and ethical issues. You know what? I'm going to ask the doctoral student and my postdocs to take care of this. And then suddenly these poor early career researchers, not only they need to learn how to collect data, learn how to analyze data, learn how to write a paper, they also need to learn how to prepare the data and maybe sometimes also the code to be open and open it. So personal data sharing is a huge task and it's a very expensive task. And right now it's just added on top of all the other tasks of the early career researchers. There are no hours allocated in any institution that I know of, nor even money that says, please spend, 1 month of your work time just in opening or just in preparing the data for future opening for your paper. Also, when it goes, you can think of tenure track or whatever career advancement, there is no application for professorship for postdoc that says you must have published open data, otherwise you're not even considered. It's always, open data is this kind of, that there's no real incentive, and I'm thinking really money, beyond the, we are good, we are scientists, we want to be ethical and transparent, and, integrity, research integrity is important. Maybe you get some citations if you open your data. So, because in my opinion, very often the organization owns the copyright of the data, they need to take this workload. However, when the budgets might be allocated by governments or grant agencies for the sole purpose of opening the data appraisal might still come into play. So with data appraisal, I mean that an organization might be, and university, for example, might have now, let's say 50 papers that came out last year, all containing personal data. Which data is worth sharing? Which one single paper one should start picking? Okay, maybe that paper was really good, that data set was really important. Let's go and help those doctoral students, those postdocs to, to prepare the data so they can actually be open following all the discussions that we had here. So possible solutions, again, maybe let's just be practical, that, let's start with one data set. Maybe sharing one data set with personal data is better than no sharing. Let's remove the load from the doctoral researchers, from the postdocs, and maybe together with PIs, budget can be allocated to have, people from research support services who could work. Of course, you still need to meet with the researchers who collected the data and work on the data, because they know all the inner details, and still prepare, the data set that could that be made open as a great example of open personal data, research data with personal data. However, maybe if I was, writing EU policy and EU grants, maybe I wouldn't say that all data should be open and add more work for the young early research career scientists. Maybe I would say let's promote some data collection initiatives so that many labs from many countries could actually join together and decide, maybe we all collect the same protocol of, let's say, functional magnetic resonance imaging, so that it's a really data collection effort where, as I said earlier, the data sharing is at the beginning, even before collecting the data. Then you have something like the UK Biobank. It's just that you can have it distributed across many sites in Europe. It's like that you collect your experiment that you're planning, and on top of it, you spend 10 minutes or 30 minutes collecting a couple of extra protocols for like a European brain biobank, for example. Which brings me to my last point, that we need more data banks. They're a bit different than biobanks, because biobanks often keep actually a sample. So here we actually will need data banks. Maybe eBrains could be a solution here, but it needs, as someone was said earlier, we got enough words, we understand the importance. It's time to start actually doing it and giving money for exactly this purpose, because also these data banks are costing money, and we still don't know who's gonna pay the bill. All right, so I think I'm done. What the time is, hopefully we have some 10 minutes for discussion. And my 4 take-home messages is that not sharing research data containing personal data is of course the easiest solution, but it's against the transparency principle of research integrity. So we can't escape from that. Protecting the subject, of course, should not come at the expenses of the transparency and reproducibility of research, especially since we often protect study participants from close to impossible scenarios. This is what I meant earlier. You know, maybe if the risks are so low, we shouldn't overprotect the subject, even though the GDPR right now wants us to protect people from something that is impossible. 3, researchers, legal, ethics, service teams, all these people must work together on solving this issue. It's not just the doctoral researcher or the postdoc that need to work on this. We need to inform study participants of the risk of the data, and of course also the importance of sharing this data, so that we can reach, maybe we will not be called broad consent, but we can reach a form of consent that the participants understand and they agree and is in line with ethics, with legal, and basically with all this principle of research integrity. And then finally, the 4th, the costs should include data appraisal, choosing which data sets are important, and giving money to data collection initiatives. So not put too much stress to those researchers who are still doing important studies. Small studies are important because they generate new hypotheses, but then it's most worth investing in data collection initiative that would start collecting a large, very large amount of, in this case, brain imaging data. And I think I'm done. Hopefully my internet was stable enough.
Thanks, Enrico. Yes, I think
Yes.
it was totally okay.
I switch the camera on again, but if it gets unstable again, I can.
So before starting the next final question and answer session and the open discussion, I would just share a few related information, like 30 seconds information. So should you need a certificate of attendance, please write an email to thinkopen.cimec@unidn.it indicating certificate of attendance, data sharing 2032 in the subject. There will be another open science workshop this afternoon at 3 p.m. Related to new ways of dealing with scientific publications. She's called Beyond Camera Ready, New Ways to Communicate Science, and registration is still open at the shortened link that you could find in the chat. And I think we have time for discussion. Carlo Minucci in chat, I think he wrote just to me, but please.
Oh, sorry.
No problem, no problem. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Enrico, for your very nice presentation. If I got correctly what you said, at Aalto University, you don't have any project, scheme, or idea to promote career also based on open science. Is that the case?
Well, it's not, you know, of course, open science is promoted, and of course it's you know, people list in their CV, but it's not a metric, it's not a strict metric. If tomorrow I'm gonna say, if you don't open your data set, there's no way you can stay in academia, then suddenly people will start opening their data set or go, you know, or find ways. But right now it's like, you know, yes, it would be good if you open the data set, you know.
It's
so
like almost everywhere, almost. Yeah. We know that there are some countries.
Even clinical trials, like clinical trials are supposed, they must open the data, and there are databases that show how many clinical trials in all the countries in the world they did not open the data. So what should we do? Should we start knocking the doors of all the clinical trials? Where is the data? You wrote that you're gonna say, you know. Well, yeah, but you know. I know.
Yeah, maybe as you propose, a solution could be like, I'm giving, if you apply for a grant, then I'm giving that amount of money But then if you open your data, we give this additional amount of money so you can hire a data scientist and do all the work needed for that. Otherwise, we don't. Maybe that might be a solution.
Maybe it will come because, okay, there are these policies from EU, EOSC, Horizon Europe. It's clear that they want us to go into that direction, but then in the end, it's the governments in our cases that needs to allocate money. But right now, we hear more stories of governments cutting money than giving money. And so, is it better that I hire data steward that will open some of the data, or should I hire two doctoral researchers who can publish some studies? It's a tough choice. I wouldn't, you know.
But also because, as you said, I mean, sharing data, I think is very relevant for the community, because acquiring data is very costly. And as soon you share those data, you reduce the cost of data. So it's, yeah, anyway.
But this is also something that I don't need to, like, I read many interesting papers. I don't really want to use, like, there's only few papers that I'm curious. I would like to reuse their data. So, but then who decides this? Some papers are more interesting and the data should be open, and some others, okay, good, nice work, but we don't need your data. So it's a tough choice.
I think that Enrico pointed out another important aspect that I want to underline, the fact that in the academic evaluation, so for all the progress, the career progresses, we should be evaluated according to the open science paradigm, and not just for obtaining grants at EU level or at national level, but all researchers at every level should be evaluated on the basis of how they open publications, how they open the data, how they open the methods, etc. Because we are funded by the national government, we are funded by people, and so they should not pay for our scholarship and then for the data and then for the publication. So this I know that this is a statement of Professor Roberto Cason and all the open science groups in Italy, but it should be a change in this in this aspect all over the world, so that we can easily open without losing the possibility to become a professor or a researcher here or abroad.
I agree. I don't know the situation in Italy, in Trento, for example, but in Finland, if you want to get a doctoral degree, you need to publish 3 first author papers. And that's a very, you know, you're not going to have time in 4 years to publish 3 first author papers and also curate the open data for each of the 3 papers and make it and follow all these processes alone. So then maybe, you know, maybe one first author paper with open data is better than 3 first author paper then, you know. So I don't know the situation in Trento, what's the requirement for a doctorate, but
it depends on the topic, but anyway, in some scientific fields, it is very similar. In general, there is a strong pressure to publish a large numbers of publications. So there is a perverse incentive to publish and publish.
Yeah.
And so you are completely right, and I agree with Georgia. At the same time, there is a risk if we put inside a criterion for the evaluation of the scientists linked to the open science. The risk is as a scientist, I practice open science only because I have an incentive, and we back to the ethical aspects of open science. I think the best way to promote open science is to invest in education, and at the same time try to change the research assessment and the evaluation system in general in the university.
I share the link. what we had as Italian Reproducibility Network, we had a talk with Felix Schombrot related to how inserting open science concepts in evaluation metrics could change the way in which people develop their careers. So if you want to take a look, it's a very interesting talk. And also we had a request for sharing slides and so on. I think we all agreed that we are going to share, that speakers are going to share their slides. I think I can put it in the description of the YouTube video, or if you have a direct link right now, we can already share it in the chat. But we can reach the attendance in the next days, for example. But this moment is supposed to be an open discussion. So if you have questions or other curiosities, please put it in the chat. Otherwise, I would have also other questions. So
yeah, I just wanted to add to Roberto's comments and to the previous discussion, because at Utrecht University, I think last year or the year before, I'm not completely sure, but they are in the process of changing the assessments of researchers. And I think they made an entire model surrounding this. So I was not involved in this, but so they also wanted to recognize the efforts in not only performing research, but also in doing education, because lots of researchers also have to give courses to students. And in being a team, being a leadership, I think, and open science was also one of those. And I think that does help, but it should not be the whole story, because we shouldn't put all the open science, additional efforts that open science put on researchers. We should also put it on support staff. And this is actually one of the challenges that we have to face, is that researchers often don't know that there's support available. They want to figure everything out themselves. And that's not necessary at all, because there's support available. And I mean, that's at our university, because I'm a little bit biased, of course. Maybe there isn't support at other universities. But I think it should be a combination of all of those factors, because indeed, as Enrico emphasized, we cannot put everything on researchers, because that's just, I mean, they want to do research. So that should be, if they wanted to, that should be their sole focus, their focus, main focus. And all the other stuff, including data sharing, it should be sort of a team effort. So not only the team research team, but also a team with support people, because that's what support people are there for. Sorry, Enrico, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, we're not, Aalto University is not well, it's the first in Finland, but it's not the first in Europe. But there are initiatives that are called research software engineers, with the idea of the research software engineer is that you have a support person who is hired by the university, is a postdoc, and this person is very talented with these matters, preparing a data set using scripts, the identifying images, whatever we talked about it today. So it's much more efficient to hire a postdoc for 2 weeks that prepares the data for you, rather than hire, let's say, a teaching assistant, master student who you need to train. This is open science, and this is, so we've been piloting this research software engineer for 2 years at Aalto, almost 2 years. And it's very good. It's more about research software engineers, so opening the code rather than opening the data. But sometimes we get requesting opening the data. UK was the first country who started the research software engineers, and we're trying to knock the doors of all the countries and all institutions that you should have a research software engineer that every team can hire, and
So is this person hired just ad hoc, and then afterwards they leave the project again, or is this one person that sort of stays at the university? And
in Aalto, these people, they are permanent personnel, so they will never be fired unless something really huge comes out. And then
because I know that does happen. So in my previous job, I was hired to look into open science stuff and be a data manager, and I was just hired on a research grant, so I was not standard support staff. And I think that's also a transition that we have to stimulate. Like, if people are just hired on a grant and then they are let go, then their knowledge is also gone, and all of their expertise and their skills. And I think, so that's why I asked. But it's good to know that this person is there to stay. Yeah. Awesome.
I would, that would be a question that I have, just to see whether we could collate different points of view, because I think that we are in sort of situation where, given the fact that figures like me, I'm not like officially a research data manager, but I also do that stuff. So we are kind of doing sort of help desk for researchers to, for example, write down data management plan and so on and so forth. And sometimes we have to craft our own solutions for specific situations and so on and so forth. So my point is whether it should be necessary or interesting in some way to have sort of interoperability of these procedures as well. So I was fascinated by the hierarchical representation shown by Enrico, where you have different people to contact for different issues. Sometimes I wonder whether we should create new figures that have all that knowledge, but I think it's better to have many different people with specific knowledge and a common language for these people to talk and interact. So my point was whether was to ask you who's triggering who. Is the researchers that have to trigger these kind of middleware figures, and then these middleware figures should communicate with each other and so on, or this should be sort of like a top-down procedure with institutions that give the guidelines, and then the guidelines are received by the middleware person, and then this person crunch the legislations, spread to the researcher, and so on and so forth. I think in the first case, you will have quicker ready solutions that are different institution in different institutions, and in the second case, you have clear procedures equal for all in this institution, but for example, the very first one will come out in 20 years or so.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I totally agree. It's a teamwork. Like when I usually talk about this, I would give the example that imagine you starting a company tomorrow. Would you just hire one person, meaning doctoral researcher, who needs to take care of the finance, of the legal, of the ethics, of the data management, and all the coding and writing the paper and sharing? And you just hire two of these, or would you rather hire one person that takes legal of finance, that takes care of finance, legal, and ethics? Another person takes care of, analyzing data and writing the paper. It's silly that academia compared to even startups, you don't even need to go to multinational corporations. This ancient idea that you need to be an expert of everything is really slow, and it's really inefficient. And in the end, at the end of the day, many get a burnout because they can't be expert of anything. And also I find it's also inefficient in a sense that each of us here might be expert in different things. I'm not the best writer. Then why should I really, knock my head on the wall to write the best paragraph when I can give it to a PI that I work with? In a second, she makes an amazing paragraph, and I can focus on the, writing a pipeline for processing the data. So, but once again, if the merit is that you need to write a paper and show that you can do everything, then, even the fact that I see so many students spending so much time with this reimbursement for the conferences, it's silly. Just give the tickets to somebody, and this administration person will take care of it. But of course, there's not enough money to hire support people and to have such a big team, and so then it's again doctoral researchers who do the whole work. But yeah, I don't want to always talk. So if other people have something to add.
Couldn't agree more.
Maybe because I mean I went through all this, and of course I mean most people here, maybe you went through your doctoral studies in different epochs of time, and I've seen the difference of you know, if I think of my PI who is emeritus retire that I used to work with, that the type of education, the type of processes that he was working with compared to the doctoral students right now, the doctoral researchers, I shouldn't call them students. But I mean, yeah, I agree with you, Vittorio. We should form, I don't know, an organization bottom up that would basically, you know, okay, EOSC, good that we have these policies, give us the money now and we make things better.
I would have another, this is a very technical question. It's, suppose that everything is working, so we have your data somewhere, and through data use agreements, people are downloading the data and so on and so forth. It's just a curiosity. I want to know what you think. So whether you should make the list of the people who are downloading the data and reusing it public, in order to give a sort of like accountability on whether those data are used for something which is wrong and so on. It's just, you know, I'm fascinated by this kind of let me use this term, fracture. It's not, maybe it has a negative connotation, but I'm seeing on one side the open access to manuscripts and publications, and then the open access to data. And so open access to publication, of course, it doesn't involve personal data and so on, but I'm fascinated by the fact that there is sort of a very different approach between the open access to these two different research products. So when I think about this, I always go for let's see who downloaded this data, what they're doing with them, and so on. And so I wanted to know whether you think this is a reasonable idea or it would be something that breaks some freedom rule or whatever.
I'm aware of a European Union-funded project that is developing a platform, a web-based platform that allows the data sharing of datasets, asking to the data holder, be it the natural person who gives his or her data, or an institution, the possibility to share the data to another institution only on the base of, for example, non-commercial purposes, or only on excluding war-related contexts, or excluding the training of a high risky AI algorithms. So they are developing like a new model for sharing. So data will be open. Then there will be a publication on the website of the data exchange between the holder and the recipients. And there will be also an explanation of the purpose that is allowed and the purpose that is not allowed. But this kind of arrangement is possible only on a contract base. This is another part of the legal framework. So we should look at the contract law and the discipline on contract law that is different among member states, and it is different among other national and supranational frameworks. So it, to me, is really interesting, and it will be really important, for example, stressing not commercial purposes when using open databases, maybe enlarged by open funded research. But it will be also a possibility to open up to really a fragmentation of policies. So in this context, it will be necessary to have like some guidance at EU level or international level to like create standard contractual clauses for data sharing in order to avoid too much fragmentation and to avoid, okay, I do not share with China, but I will share with Ireland, I will not share with Finland, but so that will be impossible like to having real open databases. So this is my opinion on this topic, on your question.
Yeah, I think you also briefly mentioned artificial intelligence. I think the topic for another workshop would be the European document on AI. I think this would be also strictly related to all that kind, you know, of the entire body of work where people are trying to re-identify people from the neuroimaging, and this involved the use of artificial intelligence. And I think this is something which would be worth discussing, especially for initial consent forms that maybe could exclude the fact that, or let's say, could state in an explicit clause that you should not try to identify data, and this would bring to other sanctions other than current sanctions related to privacy alone. But I mean, there should be, you know, one week of workshops related to privacy, data sharing, and so on. Yes, Enrico, please.
Yeah, I mean, we're out of time, but this is also something that came up. We had the training on ethics for the whole Alto. And this is very important what you're saying, because often people think, okay, now the data is truly anonymous. I can do what I want. In my opinion, no. Even if GDPR goes out of the door, ethics is still there. So even though, let's say that I collect all the data on the people in the room, I truly anonymize, but then I do something unethical with it. I train a machine learning model to predict whatever, you know, then, you know, first you lose all the way. You can't even say, please remove my data because it's anonymous. And then who is controlling these unethical, you know, uses? Of course, every country has these national boards for ethics, but they are busy with other things. So there is no process, like even with anonymous data, still all the issues might remain. And then I noticed that in the chat there was a nice comment by Paolo.
Paolo, is your mic working?
Yeah, I was saying that this microphone is not working. But
okay. We'll read aloud your question. Thanks.
But I can summarize it that you know, the first part was about the reusability of data. That you know, if all this extra work, so I took the perspective of maybe money, but of course there's also the perspective of sustainability, that you know, if we put so much work and energy, literal energy, in opening data sets that maybe are not going to be reused, so what do we gain? Is it actually more inefficient to have all this extra work? And then so yeah, Paolo is also talking about what I was saying about this data appraisal, finding which one are the best data set. And maybe I read through the lines that it's also these efforts, these global efforts, if not even European level efforts of data collection. If people would stop collecting this, I mean, tiny data sets are fine for generating hypotheses. I'm not saying stop collecting tiny data sets, but maybe start to talk with each other and collect huge, you know, 1,000 subjects, 5,000 subjects from all centers in Europe with the same protocol. Then suddenly you have a very good data set, and that is the one that people should use for their research question. And the tiny data sets, maybe we don't, it's good that people work on the tiny data sets, but we don't need to open those. That's my view.
Did you have other takes on Paolo's question?
Yeah, one thing that appeared in my mind when I read it, I think So you can choose not to share your data, but then it's still stored somewhere. So that also requires resources. And I can speak from experience because I had to clean up lots and lots of data that was just locally stored, never cleaned up, and there were multiple copies everywhere. So those were not managed very well. And that also takes up lots of resources. That's just something that popped up in my mind. There's lots of data that is somewhere in a file drawer and never used. And I think when sharing your data or making known that you have this data somewhere that can be reused, I think there's at least the opportunity that the data may be reused, which may increase efficiency. Something popped into my mind. Sorry, Georgia, go ahead.
No. I was thinking the same, because actually we used to think about our laptops and our, for example, only external keys, but data are stored in actual like rooms all over the world. So yeah, there are also this problem, environmental problem on storing data, and the big tech companies are building a great amount of land only to put the servers in the northern part of the world, to be like cold, in a cold area, not in a hot area. But also with all the environmental issues, it's necessary like to limit in a way this kind of a collection, indiscriminate collection, and like be efficient on sharing what we already have.
Okay, I don't know if there are other questions for the audience. I think very few people are still there, but thanks, because we are really out of time. I think we could wrap this up. We will have fine-tuned registration, video recording on YouTube of this workshop. We will put the slides, the link to the slides somewhere in the description of the video, but I think we could also just shoot you an email with the links in the meantime, because I think it will take a few days before I would be able to publish the videos themselves. And I want to thank the speakers, Georgia from UniTN, which is also part of the other organizer of the talk, the low tech laboratory, I think. And then Doreen and from Utrecht University, and Enrico from Alto. I think these were outstanding takes. I think there were many other topics to discuss. The first that I have in mind is specifically something related to neuroimages. So whether we could say something final about neuroimaging data being personal data or not, or anonymizable or not. I think we have very quick discussions, but also this should be a topic of a workshop per se. But I think this was amazing, and I suggest you to follow the Twitter accounts of all the speakers, because I always find interesting stuff going on there. And I don't know if you want to add something to this, otherwise we could call it a meeting and